Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Hack, and today we're continuing our Elsweyr chapter discussion. This time talking about some not so great skills in the world of ESO. Now we are just talking about weapon and armor skills today for a couple reasons. First, they already did a massive class skill update in the Elsweyr chapter. I don't think they'll be making many changes to those skills very soon. And second, I know that on the radar ahead, the developers are looking at actually balancing some of the weapon and armor skills a little bit better. So we'll be going over the 5 worst weapon and armor skills in the Elder Scrolls Online. I'll be giving my feedback. I hope you join in the discussion. Leave your feedback on these skills in the comment section below, and who knows, maybe a developer will see this and actually improve some of these skills because they are bad. Bad skill. Bad. All right, for our first skill here, we are talking about a restoration staff skill, Force Siphon. It applies minor lifesteal to your enemy, giving you healing back every 1 second when damaging that enemy. So it's about a 600 heal, can increase with things like healing done, healing received. But it's just a very basic buff, and one of the issues that this has, and one of the morphs has as well, as you can see, it's a 1.5 second cast time, which is very, very long if you are especially a healer and you need to keep heals up on your team. Just waiting 1.5 seconds for this debuff to go off is quite a long time. You might get interrupted. You might have somebody that needs to be healed. Lots of things can happen in 1.5 seconds, right? Now, one of the morphs does make it instant cast, which is a little bit better. But I think the problem with this is that you can get these debuffs, minor lifesteal, for example, from other skills that are just better. One skill, for example, that also gives you minor lifesteal is the Blood Altar skill from the Undaunted skill line. A lot of times tanks will run this. And this is quite a bit better, I think, because it is AoE, where any enemy that walks in this space is going to have that debuff on them, as opposed to just your single target lifesteal. So again, the debuffs are not that useful. You can get them from other skills, other classes can run them. So I don't know about you guys, but I'd love to see a complete rework of the Force Siphon skill. I'd like to see it do something a little bit more unique that's not done by other skills better. I think one thing that could be interesting is we did lose protection, specifically major protection from the Restoration Staff Ultimate. It would be interesting if this skill gave you a form of protection, maybe minor protection, perhaps AoE protection or conal, similar to how Combat Per gives you minor berserk. I think the addition of the minor protection buff to the Restoration Staff would be really interesting. And it would be a nice addition to Restoration Staff healer builds. All right, for our next ability, we are checking out the Destruction Staff skill line, talking about our last skill here, which is Impulse. Impulse is an AoE damage skill. Base Morph does about 6k or so damage on my Nightblade build. Just does a circular AoE for a decent amount of damage, but that's about it. It's a pretty plain skill, nothing too special about it. Then when we get to the morphs, our first morph here, Elemental Ring, does exactly the same thing, but instead of it being centered around you, you can now damage targets at range. So same radius, same damage, just ranged attack instead of based around where you are at the moment. So not a very interesting morph here for our first option. Our second option, though, Pulsar, seems like they tried to do something interesting here. It has this new effect. It applies minor mangle to enemies, reducing their max health, you can see, by 10% for 30 seconds. But the debuff itself is where the problem is. It reduces enemy health by 10%, but that's their max health. Let's say that my enemy had 30,000 health. 10% of 30,000 would be 3,000 health reduced, but the damage of my skill is already double that. I believe this only works on max health targets as well, So that debuff is really only going to count if the enemy is at full health. Otherwise, their health is already reduced, basically 90% or less health. They're already less than 10% max health. So it just doesn't seem to work for the majority of cases where you would use it. Most bosses in trials and dungeons will be resistant to the Minor Mangle debuff anyway. So I'm curious what you guys think about this one. How do you think they could fix this, or what could be added to the skill line? We already have some pretty decent skills in Destruction Staff. We have single target damage with cleave potential. We've got ground effect AoE. We've got stun, knockback with a little bit of dot potential. We have our debuff with weakness to elements. So overall, the weapon skill line does have a lot of the basic things that you would want for any build. And so I could see ZeniMax just adding tons of different effects to this last skill to make it more useful and more interesting. Let me know in the comments what you guys think could be added to this to make it better. Coming up to our next skill here, we are talking about the two-handed skill line, and specifically looking at our old friend Wrecking Blow, or Uppercut is the base morph. So Uppercut did get some changes in the Elsweyr chapter. Specifically, it got slightly better weaving, but also less damage. The damage was nerfed overall. So, the issue with this, I think, is it is a 1 second cast time ability, which means to me, you're putting in a little bit more time and it should be more powerful. It should feel more effective. So the fact that the damage was reduced is just not that great. And also the effects, the added effects on the ability are just a little bit weak, I think. So the Wrecking Blow morph gives you Empower, which increases your light attack damage 1 time. And then the other morph, sort of the PvP morph, gives you a stun on the end of your Dizzy Swing morph. Now in terms of using this skill, it is going to be a little bit easier to use in PvE, obviously, because your enemy, for the most part, is going to be stationary. But in PvP, it just is a real problem. Landing this ability in lag, for example, if your opponent moves or moves through you, it can be very hard to connect with them. And again, the damage just isn't what it used to be. If you build for it, obviously, if you have high weapon damage, high weapon crit, it can be okay. But I would prefer just to see some more effects come to this skill. What I've talked about in the past is I would actually like to see an instant cast version of this skill. Sort of separate it into PvE and PvP morphs. The PvP morph could still have the cast time. I think the cast time is balanced. If it has good damage and if it has a stun, I'm okay with a 1 second cast time. But I would like to see something a little bit more unique come to the other morph. And again, having an instant cast morph would help builds like this one, my Stamina Sorcerer, for example, who don't have access to very many instant cast spammable abilities. Having an instant cast version of Uppercut, I think, would be really good for a lot of builds. They did actually remove the minor heroism buff from two-handed abilities when they took that off of Carve. So, I don't know, bringing heroism back maybe on one of the morphs of Uppercut, I think would be interesting, and it would help a little bit as far as build diversity. Coming up next, we've got actually an armor skill that I wanted to talk about. From the medium armor skill line, this is the evasion skill. So the base morph gives you major evasion, which is 25% damage reduction from AoE attacks, which is pretty decent by itself. Now the morphs here, elude gives you a slightly longer duration. So what shuffle does is it gives you immunity to snares and immobilizations. But the issue with this, and why I think it's kind of in a bad spot still, and it's been in a bad spot for a long time, is it scales off of how many pieces of medium armor you have, but it does not scale very high at all. You can see there on the tooltip, half a second for each piece of medium armor worn. So the most we can wear is 7. 7 times 0.5 is going to be 3.5 seconds of immunity, and that's actually less immunity than we get from skills like forward momentum from the two-handed skill line. So in theory, I mean, when I think about medium armor, I think about mobility. survivability, and it feels like medium armor should have a higher uptime on snare immunity than heavy armor, but that's not the way it is currently with shuffle. So I would like to see this increased. I think it would make it a lot more useful. Nothing crazy though. 4 seconds is kind of good for a base and then scaling up to that. But it really needs to scale up higher because the major evasion itself is not enough to make this skill useful. There's also lots of other sources of major evasion. You can run Blade Cloak, for example, on your dual wield bar, and you can get some major expedition from that or more damage. So yeah, I'd just like to see this ability improved. All right, guys, that brings us up to our number 1 skill on the list today for the most useless. We're going to take a look at One-Handed Shield. We're talking specifically about Shield Charge. Shield Charge says you rush an enemy, ramming them, dealing physical damage, and stunning them for 3 seconds. So I think part of the reason that this skill is not good is because there's a better stun in the skill line already, and that's your Power Bash skill. Power Bash does either more damage or stun with Defile, so it's very strong, especially in PvP. So Shield Charge is basically just a gap closer with a stun attached. You have 2 morph options here. Shielded Assault gives you a damage shield, an incredibly bad damage shield, about 1,000 damage absorbed there on the damage shield morph, and then the other morph, Invasion, gives you a longer stun, which can be nice in PvP for certain builds. But when you think about the skill line as a complete skill line, this is essentially the tanking skill line, right? We're using this for tanking, debuffing, and utility. And so a gap closer in a tanking skill line does not make a lot of sense. Most times, especially in PvE dungeons, trials, and that types of content, you are not going to need a gap closer like this. Also, just generally, a gap closer with a stun is not the best design. If you want a gap closer, you'd be better off using the 2-handed. So we can pick a morph here and see what it looks like. I'll just do the damage shield morph because why the heck not? Get close, get my stun, and I have my single target stun, and that's about all it's going to do on my tank build. Not really helpful at all. So overall, a really disappointing skill, and I think a lot could be done here. Think about what's already in the skill line. We have armor debuffing, we have damage debuffing, we have minor heroism, we have a heal, extra block potential, we have our useless gap closer, and we have our stun already. So again, I really don't know the answer to this one as far as how you could fix this skill, but I do know that the stun is redundant and the gap close is a little bit useless, especially on tank builds. So I'm curious to see what you guys think in the comments below. And with that said, that's going to wrap up today's discussion. 5 worst skills in ESO. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, if you did, don't forget to crush that like button for me. It absolutely helps me out. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel for more Elsweyr content and build videos coming in very soon. Also, please leave your feedback on these skills in the comments section below. I'm really interested to see how you guys would fix some of these bad skills and make them more useful in the future. So as always, I appreciate you so much. Thanks for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I will see you around in the next video. Bye.